Tonight we have Genesis chapter 31. And the first thing that I wanted to do was take a look at this proverb, because I think that this proverb, or it's not a whole proverb, but a part of a proverb, which I think is really significant and attached to this study that we're doing with Jacob and Laban. And I want to read this for you. This is in Proverb 1, starting around verse 23. Just one of my favorite proverbs, by the way. Proverbs 1 is so incredibly powerful. But check out these last segments of the book of Proverbs 1. It says, "Repent when I correct you. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you, and I will make my words known to you. Because I called and you refused, and I have stretched out my hand and no one listened, and you spurned all my counsel and would not bend to my correction, let me also laugh at your calamity and mock when your dread comes. When your dread comes on like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then let them call on me, but I will not answer. Let them seek me early, but not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of Jehovah, they did not accept my counsel. They despised all my reproof. Therefore let them eat the fruit of their own way, and be filled with their own counsels. For the turning away of the simple kills them, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me dwells safely, and is at ease from the dread of evil." Isn't that an incredibly powerful segment? It's so powerful. What's the point of this whole thing? What is the point of this whole thing? Keith?
To understand that when you get the understanding of what God is trying to tell you, you can hear His voice come from that.
Absolutely. That is absolutely the point. And I know that many of you have read the prophets where, I think it might be Jeremiah or Isaiah, I can't remember which, I apologize, but you'll probably know, when he says, when you call out to me because I bring all these disasters upon you, I'm not going to listen to you. Call out to your idols that you've established to help you. See if they can help you. There is a certain point where when you have ignored all of the instructions of Jehovah, that He's like, I'm going to let you eat of the fruit that you have produced. He is gracious. Now you notice there's several times in the prophets where He says, go and eat the fruit of your own ways that you've built for yourself. But there are also times where they repented and they destroyed their idols and they called out to Him and they said, and this was one thing that I read recently and I thought was so powerful, they said, "You are right. We are absolutely guilty. We deserve to die and be destroyed completely. We place ourselves into your hands. Destroy us, kill us, or make us alive. It's up to you. You're the boss." And you know what? He turned right then and He began to heal them and help them. That was a powerful, powerful segment. But the important part here that I want you to really pay attention to is listen. Listen when I correct you, and I will pour out my spirit, and I will make my words known to you. So now let's read Genesis chapter 31 and see, when we're done reading it, if we can gain some insight into how this passage and Genesis 31 kind of ties together. All right? Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 31. I will read this out loud. It's slightly lengthy, but let's go for it. When he heard, that is Jacob heard, that Laban's sons were saying, "Yaakov has taken away everything that our father once had. It's from what used to belong to our father that he has gotten rich." He also saw that Laban regarded him differently than before. Adonai said to Yaakov, "Return to the land of your ancestors, to your kinsmen. I will be with you." So Yaakov sent for Rachel and Leah and had them come to the field where his flock was. He said to them, "I see by the way your father looks that he feels differently towards me than before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, and that your father has belittled me and has changed my wages 10 times. but God did not allow him to do me any damage. If he said, the speckled will be your wages, then all the animals gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked will be your wages, then all the animals gave birth to streaked young. This is how God has taken away your father's animals and given them to me. Once, when the animals were mating, I had a dream. I looked up, and there in front of me were the male goats which mated with the female goats were streaked, speckled, and mottled. Then in the dream the angel of the Lord said to me, Yaakov, and I replied, Here I am. And he continued, Raise your eyes now and look. All the male goats mating with the females are streaked, speckled, and mottled. For I have seen everything that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a standing stone with oil, where you vowed your vow to me. Now get up, get out of this land, and return to the land where you were born. Rachel and Leah answered him, We no longer have any inheritance from our father's possessions, and he considered us foreigners, since he has sold us. Moreover, he has consumed everything he received in exchange for us. Nevertheless, the wealth which God has taken away from our father has become ours and our children's anyway. So whatever God has told you to do, do. Then Yaakov got up, put his sons and wives on the camels, and carried off all his livestock, along with all the riches he had accumulated, the livestock in his possession which he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to Yitzhak his father in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, so Rachel stole the household idols that belonged to her father. And Yaakov deceived Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him of his intended flight. So he fled with everything he had. He departed, crossed the Euphrates River, and set out for the hill country of Gilad. Not until the third day was Laban told that Yaakov has fled. And Laban took his kinsman with him and spent the next 7 days pursuing Yaakov, overtaking him in the hill country of Gilad. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream that night and said to him, Be careful that you don't say anything to Yaakov, either good or bad. Then when Laban caught up to Yaakov, Yaakov had set up camp in the hill country. So Laban and his kinsmen set up camp in the hill country of Gilad. Laban said to Yaakov, What do you mean by deceiving me and carrying off my daughters as if they were captives taken in war? Why did you flee in secret and deceive me and not tell me? I would have sent you off with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and guitars. You didn't even let me kiss my sons and daughters goodbye. What a stupid thing to do. I have it in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night and said, Be careful that you don't say anything to Yaakov, either good or bad. I understand that you had to leave because you longed so deeply for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Yaakov answered Laban, Because I was afraid. I said, Suppose you take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find your gods with someone, that person will not remain alive. So, with our kinsmen to witness, if you spot anything that I have which belongs to you, take it back. Yaakov did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Yaakov's tent, then into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 slave girls, but he did not find them. He left Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods, put them in the saddle of her camel, and was sitting on them. Laban felt all around the tent, but did not find them. She said to her father, Please don't be angry that I'm not getting up in your presence, but it's the time of my period. And so he searched, but he didn't find the household gods. Then Yaakov became angry and started arguing with Laban. What have I done wrong, he demanded. What is my offense that you have come after me in hot pursuit? You have felt all around my stuff, but what have you found of all of your household goods? Put it here in front of my kinsmen and yours so that they can be rendered judgment between the 2 of us. I have been with you for these 20 years. Your female sheep and goats haven't aborted their young, and I haven't eaten the male animals in your flocks. If one of your flock was destroyed by a wild animal, I didn't bring the carcass to you, but I bore the loss myself. You demanded that I compensate you for any animal that was stolen, whether by day or by night. Here's how it was for me. During the day, thirst consumed me, and at night, the cold. My sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house, I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the one whom Isaac fears, had not been on my side, by now you would have certainly already sent me away with nothing. God has seen how distressed I've been and how I've worked so hard, and last night he passed judgment in my favor. Laban answered Yaakov, the daughters are mine, the children are mine, the flocks are mine, and everything you see is mine. But what can I do today about these daughters of mine or the children they have borne? So now come, let's make a covenant, I and you, and let it stand as a testimony between me and you. Yaakov took a stone and set it upright as a standing stone. Then Yaakov said to his kinsmen, gather some stones. And they took stones and made a pile of them, and ate there by the pile of stones. Laban called it Yigar Sahadutha, a pile of witness in Aramaic, while Yaakov called it Galed, a pile of witness in Hebrew. Laban said, this pile witnesses between me and you today. That is why it is called Galad. And also Mizpah, the watchtower. Because, he said, may Adonai watch between me and you when we are apart from each other. If you cause pain to my daughters, or if you take wives in addition to my daughters, then, even if no one is there with us, still God is witness between me and you. Laban also said to Yaakov, here is this pile, and here is this standing stone, which I have set up between me and you. May this pile be a witness, and may this standing stone be a witness, that I will not pass beyond this pile to you, and you will not pass beyond this pile and this standing stone to me to cause harm. May the God of Abraham, and also the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. But Yaakov swore by the one his father Isaac feared. Yaakov offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his kinsmen to the meal. They ate the food and spent the whole night on the mountain. Sorry, that was a rather lengthy section, but lots of very interesting stuff going on there. So, the first thing that I want to discuss with you is, do any of you see how there might be a connection between what's happening here in this section and this first proverb? How would I apply that? I mean, you're assuming that I've applied this first proverb to some of these characters in the Bible here. How do you think that's happening? Any ideas?
Could be from both characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jacob kind of taking a new stance. He's been working for these 20 years. His character is a bit different than it was when he left.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see in Jacob's character, or in some of the things that he's gone through and the experiences that he's had, that maybe God was trying to get his attention and he wasn't listening? Do you see that in Jacob at all? I mean, I think you can see it real easily in Laban. But what about Jacob? Do you see Jacob? Does it seem like things have been happening in the life of Jacob where you're kind of thinking, why aren't you picking up on this? You know, things are, God's trying to get your attention, but you're not really paying attention,
Yeah, I think you can, I don't want to say he didn't work for what he had, but it seemed like he took a lot of the things that in his early years were blessings.
Yeah.
And now he's kind of working for it, and we'll see him continue to work and struggle in the coming chapters.
Yeah, so I would say in that regard, it seems like he has learned. He has heard the voice of the Father, and he has responded to that correction. Is that what you were saying? I would agree with that, that at the beginning he seemed to be rather deceptive in taking what he wanted and going about trying to get his will or what he thought the Father's will was in a means that was a little tricky and a little deceitful. And we've talked about that before. Now, how would you apply this section to Laban? Has God been trying to get his attention? It seems to me. I mean, there's one just glaringly obvious, way in which God is trying to get Laban's attention. How is that?
He stole his idol. He had someone take his idols from him.
He had someone take his idols from him. That's one of the last things that happened. That's a good indicator. Yeah.
Jacob kept coming out on top no matter what he did.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, is that he keeps losing his stuff. His fortunes are dwindling rapidly. And it's been going on for 6 years, right? So, I mean, Laban does not seem to be picking up what God's putting down at all. He doesn't seem to be learning from this. In fact, the speech that Laban gives here at the end is totally reflective of that. What did you notice about Laban's speech there at the end, which seems totally incongruous? Yeah, everything is mine. The text just told us that Jacob and his kinsmen erected these stones. What did Laban say? I have erected these stones. You didn't erect those stones. I have made a witness. You didn't do anything. All these children are mine. All these sheep are mine. No, they're not.
He made an agreement and gave him away.
Yeah, he gave it all up. So he has not learned. He has not learned at all. But Jacob does seem to have learned. It makes me wonder, though, if the only thing that I could perhaps, it occurs to me that maybe God did not intend for Jacob to stay there for those additional 6 years working for Laban. It just made me wonder if God finally had to say, here's the thing. It made me think, okay, God's will is going to be done regardless, right? So you try to balance free will, human free will, and God's will. Those two things they butt heads and they don't seem to go together, and yet they are a fact of existence and they do go together somehow. So is it possible that God did not intend for Jacob to stay there for those additional 6 years and work for Laban? It's certainly possible. But because Jacob had an idea, he has gotten better about listening to God, but he's not quite there yet. Maybe God intended for him to leave the land of Paddan Aram when he got his wives and said, "Okay, go back to the land of Canaan." Where can God bless you? Where does he need to be in Paddan Aram in order to create his fortune? I don't think so. God can bless him and multiply him anywhere he's at. It doesn't matter. Now, did God use him in order to chastise Laban the Aramean? Absolutely, he did. Cookie mook.
Now, at the beginning of this chapter, we do hear that God told him to go. So, he intended him to go, or maybe he...
Well, yeah, what I was thinking is that God finally had to actually appear to him in a dream and say, "Go. You're not supposed to be here still. I didn't intend for you to be here working these 6 years, but it worked out for me because I was able to bless you here where you are. I did, we also were able to take care of Laban and his greediness. So it worked out, but it just made me wonder, would it have been better for everybody involved if Jacob had just gotten his wives after working for 14 years and left? It just seemed possible in my mind that God wouldn't have had to actually appear to him and say, because it seems like he's a little insistent. It's like, hey, wrap up your stuff and get out of here.
Would we be sitting here saying, well, God didn't tell him to go. What would that be this next scene happen? Is it because he didn't tell him?
That's true. That is true. I am thoroughly speculating here. It just made me wonder, should he have really been there for those additional 6 years? I don't know. But anyway, Jacob definitely seems to be learning, but Laban is not. Now, what can we gather for ourselves about how this is working and how might we apply this to our own lives? Well, what I'm thinking is, and this is a tricky subject, but I'll throw it out there for your consideration. If things start to go sideways in your life, is that an indication that you are under God's correction?
Sometimes.
Sometimes? James?
Yeah, it can be, it may not be.
Okay. What is the here is a common trope by the rabbis. They have this saying that there is no difficulty in life without transgression. That everything bad that happens is caused by sin. They believe that that's an absolute.
Is it always caused by your sin?
Yes, and they would say that doesn't have to be caused by your sin. It could be that you're affected by the sin of someone else, but there is no tribulation without transgression. Do you know anywhere in the Bible that would point out and say that's not true? Job?
Well, Job was righteous, but we don't necessarily. His children were not.
Do we know that they weren't, or is it just?
We don't know that they weren't.
It could be that they did do something.
Yeah.
Well, he knew that they were off doing some pretty bad stuff, and that's why he was offering sacrifices.
That occurred to me, yeah. I have wondered about that. It's like he's making sacrifices for his children, kind of trying to atone for them. So I don't know if it's because they were doing something wrong or they were not doing that kind of thing themselves. I'm not sure, but something seems a little weird there. Angela?
Weren't his friends trying to convince him that he must have done something wrong?
Yes, his friends.
And Grandma got mad.
Yeah.
Because I don't think suffering is always an indication that you've done it, that you have done anything.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
there's a purpose that needs to be accomplished, and to look at it, as God's mad at me or not, it's kind of a self-centered way to look at His will unfolding.
Well, do you think if your life starts getting squirrely that you maybe want to at least entertain the idea that you may have some sin in your life that needs to be taken care of? I think that's not a bad idea. It doesn't always have to be the case. I can only think of one time in the entire Bible, aside from Job, because there's a lot of speculation there about why was he suffering exactly. I think I've asked or talked with you guys about this before, that I know that God himself vindicates Job. And the text very explicitly says that he was a righteous man. However, there is one thing in my estimation that Job perhaps did wrong. Do you know what it is? I've never heard anyone say this, and that may be blasphemy, but I'll say it anyway.
He raised his hand against God. He started trying to put God in his theoretical place.
He did, yes. He tried to put God in a box.
You gotta sit down and brace yourself like a man, for I'm going to start questioning you.
Yes, that is true.
Every time I read that passage.
Yes. Yeah, he definitely got a little squirrely trying to explain God, which was always challenging. But there's one section there right at the very beginning where Job says, "The thing that I greatly feared has come upon me." Do you recognize that? What is that? Why would that be anything? That's exactly what I'm talking about when I say that's what I perceived that perhaps Job had done wrong. When he said, "The thing that I greatly feared has come upon me."
Little faith, would you doubt?
He did not have, he was afraid, he was terrified that something was going to happen to his wealth or his children. I mean, it's kind of hard to determine what was he talking about, but he apparently greatly feared what did happen to him. And, I mean, you know what the Bible says about fear. Every single time fear is like, thou shalt not fear. You're not allowed to do that. So, and that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Is that a sin? I believe that fear, yes, fear is a sin. It shows a lack of faith. Is that enough of a sin that God's going to wipe you out, take all your stuff, and kill all your children? I don't know about that. Job is definitely a bit of an anomaly. But the one scripture that I'm thinking of in regards to, is sin somehow involved when you've got some kind of tribulation in your life, is when the disciples asked Yeshua, who sinned, this man or his parents, that this one should have been born blind. That was common rabbinic thinking for those days, and it reflects the rabbinic thinking of today. Somebody had to have sinned or there wouldn't have been this issue. Now, Yeshua corrects them in this case and says it was neither his sin nor his parents' sin, but in order that the glory, God might receive glory. that is a complete anomaly. I've never seen anything like that in the Bible. So I think it overall, bottom line would be, if you perceive that the hand of God is upon you, you're like Naomi in the book of Ruth, God his hand has been heavy upon me, then yeah, it might be a great idea to assess your life and begin to look at yourself and how things are going for you. But does it necessarily have to be that way? No, it does not necessarily have to be that your life is having this particular challenge or this particular challenge because of something that you've done. Yes, sir.
Well, from my study in rabbinicals, that's how they thought. They thought everything bad was against sin, but Paul talks about that if there's no tribulation, your faith doesn't get anywhere. It doesn't get stronger. It's
Absolutely.
essentially weaker because you don't have to lean on God for anything.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with that 100%. So there's so much that we can learn from our struggles. I mean, you can't learn any other way. I've heard some of the best Christian pastors for decades say this, and I've always agreed with it. There is really no growth without trials and tribulations. It's so hard to grow without them.
There's a saying I like just because I love being on the ocean. It says a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor.
There you go.
And I like what you're asking about the sin. The inverse or the other part of that has been, even if it's not necessarily sin, it is an opportune time to stop, because typically in that tribulation, God is at least trying to do something in you.
Absolutely.
Whether if we can argue all day long whether it's sin or not, but you can say he's preparing, he sees something in the future, and he says, hey, you're not mature enough yet for this. It may not be a sin element, but you're not mature enough yet. I want to help develop that because I want to use you in a new way.
Yeah.
Or it could be there's a problem in you and I want to fix it.
Right.
But any one of those
Is
both of them are
cause to perk your ears up.
justifiable to stop and go, what are you doing here?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what I see here is you have two hustlers. These two guys
You do.
don't know how to ever stop hustling. Don't know that they even know when they're hustling.
They should have had their own reality show. Yeah, they were hustlers. They definitely were. Jacob seems to be learning to do a little bit less of his hustle, but Laban is a hustler from way back. So, no, I think, James, that's an excellent observation, and I think that whenever we have troubles and trials and difficulties in our life, it definitely behooves us to perk up our ears and do a little self-evaluation, and if that turns up nothing, then say, you know what? I don't know what you're doing, but I know it's something. I mean, that's why that book of James passage always comes to me, consider it all joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. We definitely need endurance, right? So I think that's something that I'm seeing in this passage is that Jacob is learning and growing some. Laban, he's not getting anywhere. He's digging himself a hole. He's going to be digging himself right into the ground, unfortunately. So let me ask you this. Several of the characters here, I think Jacob and one of his wives said it, that God is taking away the animals of Laban and given them to Jacob. Is that literally true? It's not, right? That's actually not literally true. What is literally true? What has happened here? Did God take away the animals of Laban and give them to Jacob? He gamed him, okay. But how did it literally happen? How did this transfer of wealth, but that's the way the characters seem to be relating to this, is a transfer of wealth. That God has taken away the wealth of Laban and given it to Jacob. But is that what really happened? Keith?
Well, God gave Jacob instruction on how to benefit and control the mating so he would get the color that would benefit him.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about.
So, I mean, did God literally change white sheep into speckled and spotted sheep? No, he did not. Did he change black goats into mottled goats? No, he did not. So there was no wealth transfer. The point I'm trying to make here is that the characters seem to be talking about a wealth transfer, where God is taking from this person and giving to that person. What would that make God? A thief. God is not a thief. He did not take from one person and give to another. Now, this is not a lecture on socialism. I'm not preaching a lecture on socialism, but the characters seem to be wrapped up in this idea that God has taken away from him and given to him. And you know what? So many people in our culture these days really kind of think that way. If they think of God's blessing or economics or whatever as a zero-sum game, where it's like, if I have more, then you must have less, right? I mean, there's only one pie, but does God work with pies and do things that way, Keith?
Well, no. If it's amazing, then God's creating wealth through the prosperity of these animals multiplying.
That's the key. God is creating wealth. He's not redistributing wealth.
Right.
He's not taking from one and giving it to another. He's creating it. So it's a simple fact that Laban's sheep are not reproducing. Or if they are, very spottily, no pun intended. Jacob's sheep are flourishing and growing like crazy. So it's not literally a transfer of Laban's property to Jacob's holdings. That's not what happened at all. But I just want to, kind of come against that idea that not only our characters in the story seem to hold, but today a lot of people hold that theory. It's like there's only so much of this pie, and if you got to take this and you give it to that person, that's not the way God works.
Well, my understanding is, so Laban, he entrusted Jacob with the care and the husbandry of the sheep.
Right.
That was his job.
Right.
And then it was Laban that wanted to wager. He played a game and said, well then, I'm going to get a certain color so that way you don't have them, and that's where God stepped in.
Right.
And during something he already controls anyways, the blessings of multiplication and birth. He said, I can fix this.
That's right. That's right. A similar section of Scripture is when Isaac was in the land of Abimelech, where, do you remember how Isaac created wealth when he was in the land of Gerar with Abimelech? Do you have any remembrance of how that happened? And the Philistines said, go away from us because you are too powerful for us. Do you remember how that happened? How did Jacob get so wealthy and powerful and stuff that the Philistines were like, you have to kind of go away? Did God take a bunch of wealth and stuff from the Philistines and give it to Isaac? No, it says that he rented a piece of ground and he planted some seed on it, and it yielded 100-fold in 1 year. So God, again, we see, just like with Jacob, is causing this great multiplication. Now, if Laban had repented, had heard what God was saying, and said, oh, I can see that my fortunes are going badly here. Maybe I'm acting in a bad way, and maybe I should be more fair and honest and upright with Jacob, then God probably would have multiplied all the sheep. And Jacob and Laban would have been incredibly wealthy. But it didn't happen that way, unfortunately. So just, a heads up on that. It was just this weird little thing that occurred to me as I was reading this. Now, the next question that I wanted to address here was, why was Laban's wealth diminished and Jacob's increased? Specifically, what did Laban do? Did he violate, and I'm thinking in specific terms here, like did he violate some Torah command that you're aware of? Are you aware of any Torah commands? Because I think that's the basis of, what's evil and what's good, right? What Torah commands are you aware of that Laban actually violated in regards to Jacob? Why did he take his sheep away, if you want to call it that? Idolatry, there's one. Absolutely.
About how you treat your servants, maybe, I don't know.
Okay. Well, let's identify first the things that we think that he did wrong. And then we'll see if we can connect them to some Torah commandment somewhere. So he was an idolater, and what else did he do?
he changed his wages, kept lying to him, kept changing.
Unfair. That's
Okay, so yeah, you two are on the same page there. He kind of changed his wages, yep.
Is there a difference in the Torah if it's stolen by day or stolen by night?
Interesting. Okay, so, yes.
Night.
So, stolen animals, okay. Keith?
Every time I think that Jacob wanted to leave, Laban always wanted him to stay. So he could leave.
Yeah, and I think what you said and what Darren said and what Tracy said are all kind of linked together in my mind as just being deceitful and, using trickery and not being a fair dealer, if you want to put it that way. Anything else that you can think of that Laban might have been guilty of doing to Jacob specifically that would be the cause for him to take away his wealth and, give a bunch to Jacob? Jacob's going to be blessed either way, right? I mean, this is a clear example of the promise that was given to Abraham. I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you, I will curse. It's happening exactly like God said. Angela?
Yeah, it looks like Laban thought the source of his wealth was his cleverness, and that God was trying to point out to him that no, I am the source of wealth.
Yes.
And this whole thing with the sheep dating, the only one who could have made the sheep turn out that way is God.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was his way of demonstrating very tangibly, I am the source of wealth, not
Right.
you and your cleverness and your deceitfulness.
Right. Absolutely. So I think we've gotten some good ideas here, and I think you're absolutely right in the violations that you have identified as Laban being engaged in with Jacob. Let's look at a couple of these and see what we find out. So the first one is, no one mentioned that he switched out his wives.
I was
That's-
thinking about that, but I was trying to think of Torah, what does Torah say?
I know, that one was difficult for me to kind of research. Angela?
Don't we kind of think Jacob asked for that?
We do think that Jacob kind of asked for that. I mean, that's a direct, result of him tricking his father and putting on his brother's clothing and such. So yeah, that's karma, tit for tat, sowing and reaping, however, yin and yang, however you want to
But
return
it's
that.
right in line with changing his wages, because at that point, essentially, the women are just wages. And it's not to diminish women, but in this case,
That's true.
they are the wage.
That is true.
He worked to earn them, and he changed the wage.
That's a good point. I hadn't considered that. I hadn't considered switching the
That's why I
wives
didn't
is
mention it,
changing the
because
wages.
it's
Yeah.
effectively the same
Yeah.
exchange
Yeah.
wages.
That is. Yeah. That's a
in
good
the way
one.
that they were being traded.
Sure,
We
sure.
argue that wasn't wise. but
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's a good point. You're absolutely right. So, switching out the wives and changing the wages, I think that, take a look with me at Leviticus chapter 19, and I think we can see some of the connections here with what exactly, and I think this is always a good idea to be familiar with the Torah and what does it say about how we treat each other. I mean, this is the most critical thing, right? How we treat each other and what the Torah says about how we should do that. So I thought, let's go ahead and review this. Look at Leviticus 19, and let's start in verse 11. So, and I think that this section in Leviticus will kind of detail for us a couple of things that Laban was doing wrong. It says, you must not steal, you must not tell lies, you must not deal falsely with your fellow citizen, you must not swear falsely in my name, so that you do not profane the name of your God. I am Yehovah. You must not oppress your neighbor or commit robbery against him. You must not withhold the wages of the hired laborer overnight until morning. You must not curse a person who is deaf or put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. You must fear your God. I am Yehovah. So there's, I think that section there right in verse 11, frankly, kind of deals with that most straight up, in a straight up fashion. Do you think so, or do you have any other ideas in that regard?
I think you hit one that we didn't say, which is the last one. You must fear Yahweh your God. I don't think Laban is. I was going back and reading some of this, and it's Jacob that has to go to Laban and say, and he said, you weren't faring very well before I came.
Yeah.
And what Jacob does is he fears God and says, this is because of God. It's not because I'm a great person. It's because God has blessed this.
Yeah.
And you don't see anywhere that Laban acknowledges that.
Yeah, I agree.
So there is a failure to, along with all the other stuff.
The failure to acknowledge. Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Tracy.
I was going to say, I mean, it can be summed up pretty simply when you understand that the Torah is about loving the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. He's doing neither of those things. So,
Yeah, he's doing neither of those things. That's right. Angela?
Were you going to go further on in that chapter? There's about 4 more.
Yes, there are. I was going to jump forward a little bit to verse 35. In verse 35, Leviticus 19:35 says, "You must not do injustice in the regulation of measures, whether of length, weight, or volume. You must have honest balances, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You must be sure to obey all the statutes and regulations. I am Yehovah." I picked out this section regarding weights and measures. It sounds really weird today because we don't use necessarily weights and measures, although we technically do. It seems anachronistic to us and kind of antiquated. Does anybody pick up what I'm putting down in regards to weights and measures? What are your thoughts about that, James?
You have to equally weigh what somebody's doing to what you give them in return.
Absolutely.
The way a scale works is you have one thing here and you offset it, and when it's equal, then you're equal.
Yes.
It's a fair trade.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, if someone comes to you and says, I want to buy a pound of bologna, okay, then you have to put a 1 pound weight on this side and start piling on the bologna until the scales are balanced. But if your 1 pound weight is maybe an ounce shy of a pound, then you're piling on a little bit less than a pound. Now, why would someone do that? Because all of those ounces are going to add up to a significant savings, and your client who's buying your bologna isn't going to know the difference. He's going to say, it looks like a 1 pound weight to me. Laban is essentially doing the same thing with unjust weights and measures. Now, that sounds weird to us, especially if you're not a merchant who's buying and selling things. How might unjust weights and measures apply in our everyday lives? To those of us who are not merchants or something. Angela?
Well, we trust that gas pump is measuring that.
Yeah, with Arizona Department of Weights and Measures is the one who is, weighing out your gasoline. You got to trust that you're actually getting a gallon of gas. That's a good point.
Everything we buy is marked up. Everything. It's just getting worse. And we're not paying for quality things anymore. We're paying for garbage, basically. We're paying more for it. That's not fair.
That is not fair weights and measures. The more that you become aware of this, and the more your mind kind of becomes cognizant of all of the ways that these things are not exactly fair in our society, it becomes more and more obvious how much we are slaves in Egypt, doesn't it? You realize you're not free. You don't actually own anything. I mean, you really don't, unfortunately. But unjust weights and measures. I see that being applicable. Angela, you had some. I'm assuming you had something else in mind.
Do not practice divination, which you were doing with the thousand idols. It says, do not prepare your daughter by making her a harlot and putting away the daughters for talking there and sold them.
Yeah.
It says, when a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. He shall be to you as a native, and I don't think that Jacob was treated as a native.
Right.
Well, the sons weren't. The sons saw him as a stranger right there to the end.
Absolutely.
Just all sorts of things.
And this is not only just someone who's come from another land to stay with them. This is their relative. This is a family member. I mean, this is a cousin. So.
Still uses Yahweh's not his God.
No,
So,
he's not. But that doesn't let him off the hook.
just like the rest of the laws, it's like the nations apart from Yah kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that those several passages in the 19th chapter of Leviticus, and you might, circle that chapter and make a note to yourself. That whole section of the book of Leviticus has a lot of really applicable things for our day and age. You might, at first glance, read it and go, oh, yeah, it doesn't exactly. No, it does. It absolutely applies in every way you can think of. So we've kind of hit, he's switching out the wife and some idolatry and changing the wages. Now, what about these paying for, wild beasts attacking the animals and made him pay for incidents of theft, whether a sheep or a goat was stolen by day or stolen by night? Do you know about a Torah commandment that has to do with that kind of stuff? Angela? I vaguely remembered something about that, and I had to go and look it up. And then when I looked it up, it didn't seem to apply. And then I saw this last little verse, and I was like, there it is. Let's take a look at Exodus chapter 22. In Exodus chapter 22, let's start again in verse 11. Or no, sorry, 10. Verse 10. Exodus 22:10, it says, if a man gives his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep, and it dies or is hurt or is carried away without anyone seeing it, then there will be an oath to the Lord between the two of them that he has not laid his hand on his neighbor's goods, and its owner will accept this, and he will not have to pay. But if it was stolen from him, he will pay its owner. So I thought, okay, Jacob's busted, if somebody steals it while it's in your care, then you're in trouble. However, I kept reading. If it is torn in pieces, then he will bring it for evidence, and he will not have to pay for what was torn. If a man borrows an animal from his neighbor, and it is hurt or dies when its owner was not with it, the man who borrowed it will surely pay. If its owner was with it, he will not have to pay. If he was hired, what was paid for the hire covers it. That's right, you tell him. So, what do you, after having read that, what do you see is applicable here? Does any of this apply to Jacob and Laban's situation? Is Jacob borrowing animals from Laban? No, he's not borrowing. Is he... Well, let me ask you this. If an animal is stolen from the flock of Laban while Jacob is taking care of it, is it covered? Does he have to pay?
So I see this a little differently because the term hired, I've studied this one for a couple other reasons in a couple other cases. The hired is essentially if you rented the animal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's not so much that Jacob was hired, but if Jacob had rented the use of a donkey,
right,
and the donkey is then damaged, then, and that's actually still true in our system, as long as it's not excessive abuse,
sure,
then the cost of the rental covers the wear and tear.
Right. So was Jacob renting these animals from Laban?
No. Jacob, I think Jacob was legitimate to have to pay for this because could have been if their employment contract was such, because Jacob had an obligation to protect these animals. Mm-hmm. And the animals were damaged under his protection, or he was obliged to protect them.
Okay. So if an animal is stolen or torn by wild beasts, we have two separate issues here that Jacob specifically brings up and is complaining about, like he's been wronged. If an animal was torn by wild beasts, I myself bore the burden, and you, it says, if an animal was torn by wild beasts, you made me compensate. But if it was stolen by day or stolen by, I don't remember which one of the two did he actually say that about. He says, I haven't eaten any of the males. If one of your flock was destroyed by a wild animal, I didn't bring the carcass to you, but I bore the loss myself. You demanded that I compensate you for any stolen animal. Was that right or was that not right? This is a complicated case, and I'm not asking you to be, lawyers in this situation, but I'm curious about regarding what we just read in the Torah. How does that work?
I think what we just read is about borrowing. This is about an employment contract.
Okay.
And so it's more a matter of what was in that employment contract, which we know kept changing all the time anyway.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, there was clearly an employment contract. He was not borrowing the sheep necessarily. He was hired for a wage to care for these sheep. What was the wage? Certain of the sheep from their young. Keith?
Well, he makes a statement, the scorching heat during the day and the cold at night wore me down and I lost a lot of sheep.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how much a lot is, but it sounds like it was affecting his
Yeah, it would.
sanity.
Sure. Yeah, it sounded like it for sure. So this is just something, and I would encourage you to kind of take up your scriptures and look at some different interpretations of this scripture. Look at some different translations of these scriptures. Look at them in their original Hebrew and see what you can find out. It's always a really good idea to have a good handle on what these Torah commandments actually are, and not only to reflect on how they play off of this text and who's exactly guilty of what, because a lot of times the Bible is going to tell us that just because Jacob says, you made me bear the loss and you demanded that I compensate you, like he's throwing accusations, does not make it true. I want to just bring that to your attention. Just because the Bible has a character saying, you ripped me off, does not necessarily make it so. Just because Jacob is pronouncing these things that Jacob did, you want to make sure that you know whether that's actually true or not, or whether Jacob is just talking. Because it seems to me like what James and I were just talking about a second ago, is that it may be that Jacob is accusing him of something that he's not technically guilty of. Now you might be saying, well, hey man, the Torah hasn't even been given yet. Well, that's true. That does not, however, mean that it is not still valid. I mean, that's my own personal belief. You can take that for what it's worth, but the Torah is universal, right? I mean, we know that Abraham obeyed God's Torah hundreds of years before it was given, so something's going on there. I think it's valid. So, just something to chew on. Was there a hand that was up that somebody wanted to say something, James? Oh, go ahead, Jared.
Well, it states that if a person trusts a neighbor to look after their animals, then it says down here, if it's stolen from that neighbor, he does have to make restitution to the owner.
If it's stolen?
If it's stolen from the neighbor.
Doesn't it say that there has to be an oath between them and he has to swear, I did not steal it? Mm-hmm. But he doesn't have to pay. Yes, he does, or yes, you are correct?
Well, the way I look at it from this translation, that was was stolen from the neighbor, he must make restitution to the owner. Yeah, if there's an oath.
Okay.
Between it.
Yeah, they have to go before the Lord, and the man has to swear on an oath, I did not have anything to do with stealing this thing. And then he will not have to pay. So, what's that? That's not what it says?
There's several different passages that talk about this, and the differentiation is the reason that the neighbor has the animal. Mm-hmm. Whether it was borrowed or entrusted into care as basically, hey, I'll take care of your goat for you while you're gone, or whether it was rented. And there's several different ones that they seem to weave together, but in this case it's just.
As it is stolen, he has to make restitution. If it's injured or dies, he does not have to make restitution.
Well, then right in the section in verse 10 says, if a man gives his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep, and it dies or is hurt or is carried away without anyone seeing it. That might be a little bit of a weird phrase there, is carried away without anyone seeing it. That sounds like theft, but it may actually be it was carried off by a wild beast. You know what I'm saying? Because that might be different than verse 12 where it says if it was stolen. You said I'm making a distinction here between stolen or carried off by wild beasts. Darren?
Driven away.
Driven away. This might be one of those cases where you want to look at what it says in maybe a literal translation, or look at what it says in the Hebrew. When a man gives to his associate a donkey or bull, or it dies, or is broken, or is captured.
So the first thing is the reason that he has it, he's in possession. Gives it to him to keep, or another way
to keep, to guard, to protect. Watch my dog for me because I'm going on vacation.
See where he has to make a person has to make restitution.
Mhm.
It's more around the fact that they didn't shamar the animal.
Right.
And if they did, then they don't have to. So if the animal is injured or dies and the person is with it,
Mm-hmm.
when that happens, they don't have to make restitution. But if
Right.
they're not with it,
Mm-hmm.
they leave it abandoned in the field or whatever, and it dies, we do have to pay it for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then if I say, hey, can I borrow your animal? I need to plow a field. And you say, yeah, sure, borrow it. I incur a greater liability now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not doing it as a favor to you. You're letting me take the animal. So
Yeah.
really, whenever I borrow something from a friend, I'm sort of scared.
Sure.
Because I feel like I have a higher set of liability. Now, if I rented it from you,
Right.
then the rent should cover damage.
That has been my understanding of this, and that is a common rabbinic approach to that passage. It's also the idea is if you loan me your lawnmower and you come along with it and you're like watching me as I'm mowing and it breaks, I'm not responsible because you were actually with it. So there's some little challenging things here and there that we need to kind of do a little more research on, because it's not terribly cut and dried.
Just don't borrow stuff.
Don't borrow stuff, or don't loan stuff. That's a great idea, actually. Yeah, it's always best if you don't borrow or loan stuff, but you do want to be kind to your neighbor.
And this may be a can of worms we don't want to go but in this, a lot of these conversations around who's your neighbor.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
while they're relatives, are they actually neighbors? and not just physical neighbors, but by neighbor, typically what I understand it to mean is somebody that's in Torah with you. And
That's
the
what.
key from a rabbinic perspective here is that if someone's not within Torah, you can actually deceive them.
No, I don't know about that.
Well,
the
rabbis at least.
No, I know that's true. And think about this. It's like if you are a member of the covenant, you cannot charge someone interest on loans, but you can charge interest on loans for someone who is not a member of the covenant, right?
I disagree with that, but I understand where you're going.
You think that the Jews have continuously loaned money to the Gentiles at interest?
No, that piece I get. There's two different kinds of lending money, even within Torah.
Okay, I'm just talking about usury, lending money at interest.
There are ways to lend money to someone else in Torah and charge. You can't charge excessive, but there are ways to charge interest.
Oh, really? I had never heard that. I would not do that. I would not do that. What, Darren?
But when I was reading the Torah, it says you can treat a stranger as you would treat your native born.
Yeah,
So you
that
look at it
absolutely.
ethically, you just have to treat them with respect you would your brother.
And the ultimate thing is Yeshua when they ask him, well, who is my neighbor? And who does he say is the neighbor? The one who showed loving kindness to a Samaritan, which was a hated pariah. I think that's as clear as you could possibly get. That's a tough one, though.
Well, the Samaritan was the one that showed loving kindness to the dead guy on the road.
Yeah, so who's the neighbor? The Samaritan is the neighbor. He was a neighbor to that guy. So, what is the answer to the question, who's my neighbor? Everyone, right? And it would have to be.
Well, but we see in Torah numerous examples, and again, Like the rabbis will uphold Abraham as being righteous and what he did with Sarah and different things because he was dealing with people that were not essentially under Torah. And so the theory, and I don't know my answer on it, the theory is that because of who Laban was, Jacob was not obligated to practice Torah with Laban per se.
I totally understand. That is a can of worms, and I'll grant you that. I can totally understand that there are rabbis that would teach that. I don't know that my rabbi would teach that, but that it wouldn't surprise me to find some rabbinical authority who says you can do that as long as they're not a member of the covenant. That would not surprise me at all. And I think I've read that in some of my rabbinic commentaries, but I don't know that I agree with that interpretation necessarily. I think it's always best to spread the love as much as you can. Anyway.
There's a difference, I don't know what it is, between like family, brother, part of the body, and a neighbor.
In what way would you say that?
Well, I don't really know. I just know that when you are in Messiah Yahushua,
There's a special obligation?
you are one with that person. Like we are one flesh.
Like even more than neighbor? Or
Yeah. Well, yeah, because they are outside of the covenant. You know, there's some kind of separation there.
Sure.
They're not part of the body.
Sure. So it's not that you would treat them
No.
better or worse, it's just a matter of there is a certain fellowship, communion, however you want to put it, between fellow believers, right?
Perhaps expectation. And
Yeah.
whatnot, you know.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me.
For example, if somebody was coming to defraud my family or to harm my family, I'd be willing to deceive them.
Oh, sure. Yes.
And I could say that Laban was more, we have plenty of examples where Laban was defrauding
Yeah.
Jacob. So for Jacob to reciprocate with deceit and lies to essentially return the defraud.
Well, that's a little different, though. I mean, doing evil for evil, insult for insult, I don't think is the right thing. However, you just said two completely different things. If someone is going to attack on the Shabbat, like what happened with the Maccabees, it's like, oh, we're not going to defend ourselves. We're not going to pick up weapons and fight because it's Shabbat, I think it's okay to violate the Torah command to rest on Shabbat in order to pick up your sword and defend your family. Life would always trump the commandment. Yeah,
that's a rabbinic. You can keep a greater commandment and violate a lesser commandment.
Yes. But as far as somebody did this to me, so therefore it makes it okay for me to do it to them, that's a different thing, in my mind. Are you suggesting that they are not a different thing?
I'm not saying that you would then go in a vindictive way to attack them, but I'm saying if you were locked in...
No, well, I mean, let's say that somebody's treating you in a less than upright, not dishonest weights and measures, they pulled a Laban on you, is it okay for you then to pull a Laban on them?
My goal would be to be honest and to exit the situation, but if I can't exit the situation, then if I have to be deceitful in order to protect my family in the process, I would.
Okay, yes, exercising deceit in order, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Like David, he pretended to be crazy.
Yeah.
It's like that. I don't see anything wrong with it.
No, absolutely. And I think that in order, if you need to lie and pull some kind of deception in order to preserve life, I got no problem with that. The Torah, I don't think, has any problem with that. I mean, the rabbinic decrees through a long, long time has no problem with that. We preserve life. That is the most important thing, is to preserve life. That is a big can of worms, but you are correct. You are absolutely correct.
Never lay
So for example, someone comes up to me and says, say that you do not believe in God and all this.
I knew you were going there.
I
I knew you were going
Should
there.
I say I don't, because aren't we supposed to die for
Okay,
faith?
that's a great question. And is that what the Bible is talking about when it's talking about denying the Messiah? What's that? You think it is?
Not my God, pretty much denial. Yeah, I would think so.
It's one thing to monitor yourself, but to monitor your child is a different story too.
No, because
to this. Like I believe what Paul says, the Holy Spirit leads you in certain circumstances like that where it's not cut and dry. Some people would lay down their life. Like there's pastors
I'm
in
gonna try to
everyone
believe
pastors
first.
that lay down their
When it
life.
comes to it, I'm not gonna.
And
Well,
there's-
but see, okay, now hold on. Brianna just said something interesting. I'm going to try and kill you first. Well, that violates the commandment, doesn't it?
No, I don't.
Turn the other
He
cheek.
cannot physically defend.
He who does not defend his life.
But not by.
See, I think that we may have a bit of a misunderstanding regarding what it means to deny Yeshua. I don't think that denying Yeshua is the case where some foreign pagan government is going to say, deny your God or we will kill you. Now, okay, here, let's play out this scenario. You got one situation where, like, okay, this is what we were all taught through Sunday school in the churches, is that the anti-Messiah is going to come along and say, renounce the Jesus or you will die. Let me ask you this. When we have pictures in the Bible that are prophetic shadow pictures of the anti-Messiah, I'm thinking of Daniel, I'm thinking of Nebuchadnezzar, I'm thinking of Antiochus Epiphanes. Did they ever say, deny that your God exists, deny that you worship this God? Is that how it happened? No. What did they demand instead? That's what they demanded. You're going to worship our God as well. You must bow down and worship this God.
But they didn't. They were willing to take the punishment for it.
That's a very different thing. That's a very different thing than saying, give up your God. You know, please don't hear me say that it's okay to go around and, denounce Jesus or denounce God or something. I just was questioning you. Do you think that's what it's talking about? And I don't think that that's exactly what it's talking about in the passages that Yeshua that we're quoting from Yeshua. But I certainly wouldn't do that. But that's a tough one. Being requested to give up your life.
Could go deeper to deny. He sees the word made flesh to deny the word.
I was just gonna say that.
I just want to go deeper. You deny the Torah, then you just denied him because he was the Torah of flesh.
There you go.
So
Good
if
point.
you accept Jesus be Torah.
That's awesome.
Well, what about okay, so you get help, you do the whole thing again where it's like you believe in this, and if you say yes, and I'm going to kill your child, you denounce him, do what he says, and he kills you anyway. Now you just doom yourself eternally.
Good
You
point.
don't know. You're really going to trust the person that's out to kill someone?
The thing is like these are just words. I think we know that God knows our hearts. Right?
But-
So when Peter was faced with this thing, what was his heart in that? Right?
Scared.
He was scared. Right?
Was he doomed to
Was
hell?
he doomed to hell?
Not at all.
Deny the Messiah? Why not?
3 times.
But even Paul
But
talks
he
about
asked-
too, like, how much freer we are in our service to the Messiah when we don't have family.
That's true. That is
There
true.
are other obligations that we have when we have children and we have a wife and we have to protect people.
Complicated.
It does complicate issues. Maybe it's some of us will see that in black and white. Some of us will see some gray areas, but that does complicate it. Keith?
Right now, we haven't been really tested, okay?
No.
We're just speculating on a lot of things.
Yes.
But your point was well made about when the time comes, what it could look like,
Sure.
right? And, do they gather up people that will reject whatever God they're pushing,
Yeah.
push in a camp, and then from there, you're already marked, you're not getting out of there anyway.
Sure.
So,
And this is not me saying thus saith the Lord, but in my estimation, it's highly unlikely that something like that would happen in America. In other parts of the world, it's happening now and has been for a long time. It's commonplace. In America, it would seem unlikely to me. That would be an extraordinary circumstance that it would happen here in America. However, it doesn't need to happen here in America. We'll trip over things ourselves. We'll give up our God and take on idols with no questions asked. We've already done it. So God, the devil, however you want to attribute it, it doesn't need to employ that tactic in America. The deal's already done. We got idolatry out the yin yang here in America. You don't know. You don't need somebody with a sword to your neck saying convert or die. That's probably not how it would happen in America.
Well, people let them know.
That's another can of worms. True enough. Is it time? Am I supposed to be wrapping up? Yes, I am. Okay, we're going to wrap up.